Spike rested his elbows on the metal balcony railing, his chin in his talons. The sun was sinking slowly behind what was left of the big city. The black voids were no longer there, but everyone was still afraid. Everyone who was left, that is. He kept thinking about Twilight, wondering where she was, if she'd made it out in time, and if she was okay. The thought of never seeing her again made a lump form in his throat. She was his world in a lot of ways. His best friend, his mother, his teacher. To imagine a world without her was so heartbreaking that it immobilized him at times. His thoughts would then go to the others, usually Rarity first. His beloved Rarity. How life would seem so much less beautiful without her if she hadn't made it. Dash, Applejack, Fluttershy. He turned his head to look into the hotel room he shared with the three he'd been traveling with. One of them was Pinkie Pie. He'd been at the bakery when it happened, ordering some of the cake's special sapphire cupcakes, when everything began to fall apart. Before he had even the chance to look for Twilight, he'd been scooped up by Pinkie and teleported away from town by Luna, along with several others. They'd ended up somewhere west of Ponyville, and decided as a group to head toward Manehattan. There were 11 of them to start. Now there were only 5. Pinkie and a gray Pegasus stallion with a darker gray mane sat at a table and were looking over a map they'd found in the deserted hotel. On the floor, Alleyway was playing a game of marbles with Dinky to try and keep her calm. For a while, all the little unicorn could do was cry. She was so scared of everything that even a touch from a friend sent her into fits of hysterics. Allie was the only one who could calm her, and Spike figured it was because she was a mother herself. She knew how to take care of a frightened foal, and not lose her patience. Little Dinky looked up from her game now and out at Spike, a hint of a smile on her lips.
Come play with us, Spike.
The baby dragon shrugged.
I'm not really in the mood for games.
Allie offered him a polite smile that didn't quite reach her pale blue eyes.
Come on, Spike. It's not a bad idea to take your mind off of things for a little while.
Maybe because she was the oldest of the group, or maybe because the way she spoke reminded him somehow of Twilight. But Spike eventually sighed and gave in. Take his mind off things. Sure, like a game of marbles could do that.
Dinky, why don't you teach Spike our game? I'll be right back.
The tall unicorn got to her hooves and walked across the room to join the two standing over the map. There were a lot of red crosses and a few black circles that she didn't quite understand.
What have you figured out?
She asked in a quiet voice.
That we're really good at drawing X's and O's,
said Pinkie. She looked up and gave a small sigh.
All these red marks are where Spectrum found more ponies.
Allie looked at the winged stallion.
Not alive, I take it.
Not alive. Or, not really alive.
Spike glanced over at the group of adults, but made an effort to at least pretend he was listening to Dinky. Those zombie ponies, or whatever they were, gave him the willies. Even just talking about them made him glance over his shoulder. Manehattan was no stranger to these undead ponies. There were other survivors here, too. Some who'd lived here before the city had been attacked. Some who traveled here from their own small hometowns, but they were all scattered. Fear kept those familiar with one another together, and made them stay away from those they'd never met before. Though it made Spike wonder if there were others from Ponyville and Manehattan as well, also too scared to really go out and look. As the 3 ponies conversed, Pinkie would compulsively glance at Spike from time to time, as though making sure he was still there. From the moment they'd been sent away from Ponyville, the two had stuck together. It was as though they were each other's only connection to the friends they both missed and worried for. Pinkie was still random from time to time, though her silliness was almost non-existent anymore. She was still the pony who tried to cheer everyone up and keep a positive attitude, but Spike woke in the middle of the night and heard her crying. It wasn't right. Out of any pony he knew, Pinkie was the last who should ever shed a tear. So he'd left his comfy circle of blankets on the floor and climbed into bed with her. Though she'd been surprised at first, she eventually wrapped her hooves around him and snuggled him close. Her tears slowed and eventually came to a stop, and they fell asleep together. That was 4 nights ago. Now they shared a bed without even thinking about it.
We're running out of supplies.
Spectrum was saying quietly.
And water.
If those marauders hadn't gotten here first, we might have had enough of both to last the week. But now?
Allie looked evenly at Pinkie.
What do we have enough for now?
A full day of water and maybe 3 of food.
The unicorn cursed softly. She looked down at the map, though her gaze was far away. The other 2 watched her, knowing the wheels were turning.
There are at least 3 other camps set up in this city.
Spectrum said.
If we can get one of them to talk to us...
No one will talk to us.
Allie countered darkly.
It's every pony for themselves now. We're all fighting for resources.
Pinky blinked.
But they wouldn't let us starve! Would they?
When Allie gave her no reply, the Earth Pony swallowed hard.
Spectrum, how far from the city have you gone? Just to these outlying areas?
Yeah, the other Pegasus ponies here have already decided what areas they deemed off limits to outsiders. And I didn't want to go out too far.
Allie looked down at the map, a line of concentration between her brows.
What's this black circle and question mark right here? Out past the edge of town.
I guess.
Spectrum shrugged.
I saw smoke this morning in a direction I haven't seen smoke before. I assume it's more ponies. We saw that the others are afraid of fire, so I thought it was a safe bet that it's more friendlies.
In search of sanctuary, no doubt.
Allie looked between the two, out to the coming twilight.
If they're only out that far, they should have made it here by now.
She left the table and looked down at Spike.
You were out in the balcony a lot today. Did you see any other ponies coming in over the bridge? It's the only way into the city from the east, so we would have seen them.
The baby dragon shook his head innocently.
I didn't see any movement at all.
Not even any pony down by the water?
Nope.
She swiveled her head to Pinky and Spectrum.
Doesn't that seem odd to you?
That no one else was out foraging?
Spectrum asked.
Yeah, a bit.
We can't be the only ones low on supplies,
Pinky added. With determination in her eyes, Allie looked at Spectrum.
How do you feel about a quick outing?
He shrugged.
I'm game if you are. Those spirit things are harder to spot at night. Though I've noticed when they're in their corporeal form, they stick to the ground. Only when they're in a Pegasus body do they fly. I'd still feel better with some company.
You got it,
Allie replied.
I'm too curious about who might have started that smoke to just sit around here anyway.
She looked at Pinkie Pie.
So far, it seems like we're safe here. Will you be all right if both of us go?
In reply, the pink pony turned and grabbed the handle of a sharp butcher knife. Around the handle between her teeth, she said,
"We'll be fine."
With a decisive nod, Allie and Spectrum strapped on their saddlebags and left the room just a few minutes later. Dinky watched them go with a quivering bottom lip, but Pinky was soon on the floor with the little foal and the baby dragon, making funny faces that had all three of them laughing in no time. Spike even said one of her faces was eerily similar to a face Twilight made when she was stressed out. It launched him into a story about a time when he and Twilight still lived in Canterlot, and Twilight had stayed up so late studying one night that, by the time she fell asleep, it was already early in the morning and she slept right through her class. As with any time Twilight Sparkle was stressed out, hilarity ensued when she realized what she'd done. Pinky listened attentively, giggling at all the appropriate times and adding comedic flair to make the story that much funnier. But inside she was a ball of nerves, praying that Allie and Spectrum would return soon and safe. She'd mastered the technique of hiding behind her giggly persona ages ago, and it came second nature to her now. Pinky always thought of it as self-preservation somehow, a way to not bring every pony else down when she was in the dumps. Tonight it was serving a dual purpose in keeping the other two from seeing just how scared she was, but keeping them from being scared as well. At night when they couldn't sleep, Pinky and Spike had whispered conversations, her hooves around him, his scaled little face to her breast. There was nothing romantic about it. Neither of them were attracted to the other. But they were all they had of their old lives at the moment, and both wanted to hold on to it as tight as they could. Pinky knew. Even behind Spike's silly story and easy laugh, he was scared too. She could only imagine what Dinky was feeling. When the story ended, the ambient noise from outside crept in a little easier. They could hear noises they didn't want to. Noises of dead or dying ponies being taken over, or simply being killed to free them from their pain. Nighttime was always the most frightening time. That was when the ponies, still very much alive ponies, took to the street to see what they could find, and what they could steal. Dinky moved closer to Pinky and looked out the balcony doors.
"Where's Ellie?"
she asked quietly.
"She'll be back soon,"
Pinky promised with forced cheer. During the day they all came up to the top floor so they could have a better vantage point of the city and the East Bridge. At night they locked the balcony doors and barricaded themselves in on the first floor. Beds had been dragged down to the grand foyer so they could sleep together by the front doors. If any pony tried to get in, they'd likely try the front first, and the ponies inside could easily be alerted so they could fight to protect their sanctuary.
My stomach's rumbling.
Spike muttered.
Maybe we should head downstairs and get dinner ready. I'm sure Allie and Spectrum will be hungry when they get back.
Good idea, Spike!
Pinkie got to her hooves and trotted across the room to step out onto the balcony. A quick search of the sky showed her nothing, but down below there was definitely movement. Ponies were already out, and it wasn't even fully dark yet. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned back to the room with an uncompromising grin.
Let's just lock this up, and we'll see what we can make to eat.
As soon as the doors were closed, Spike looped a heavy chain through the gold bar handles and clicked a sturdy lock into place. Since the top floor and bottom were the only ones used, they didn't have to worry about any other room. So Spike grabbed a rolling pin and a pair of scissors and started down the multiple flights of stairs. Dinky followed, bag of marbles swinging between her teeth, and Pinkie brought up the rear with the map shoved into her saddlebags and the butcher knife between her teeth. Twilight's horn glowed as she used her magic to gently dab at the wounds on Cheerilee's body with a wet piece of cloth. They should have reached Manehattan days ago, but Rarity insisted on a proper burial for Sweetie Belle, and with Cheerilee as injured as she was, every pony had to take turns pulling her makeshift cot along. As the days progressed, Cheerilee looked worse and worse. Twilight's own cuts and those of her friends were just memories now. Magic healed them just fine, save Raindrop's leg for a second time. But Cheerilee's condition worsened hour by hour, and soon it was impossible to move her without risking more damage.
How is she doing, Twilight?
The lavender unicorn lifted her head to see Rarity coming into the tent Applejack and Big Mac made from what was left of the cloaks. She looked exhausted and bedraggled, even though their camp hadn't moved for a couple of days.
She's not doing well, I'm afraid,
Twilight answered honestly.
She's lost a lot of blood and will lose a lot more unless we can get her to a hospital. I've been doing everything I can with magic, but it's just not enough this time.
Twilight frowned and looked at Cheerilee.
I never thought I'd have to say that magic wasn't enough.
That doesn't mean you're not enough,
said Rarity kindly.
You're wearing yourself out, always tending to Cheerilee. Why don't you go sit by the fire for a little while? Get something to eat. I'll take care of her.
Rarity, are you sure?
Of course I am, darling. Pokey is keeping watch for us, and I wouldn't dream of asking any pony to clean a wound with their hooves and mouths. It's unsanitary and not to mention downright disgusting.
She lifted her chin proudly.
I am the only other unicorn who can help, and so help I shall.
Twilight couldn't find the right words to say as Rarity stepped forward and settled herself down beside Cheerilee, magically floating a fresh, cool piece of linen from the pile to dab at the earth pony's face. The company of her friends and a full belly sounded so appealing, but Twilight folded her legs under her and rested beside Rarity. She made to nuzzle her, but Rarity flinched away.
Don't.
Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she didn't look at her friend.
Please don't, Twilight. Because if you nuzzle me or hug me, I'm just going to lose it, and I'm just not in the crying mood.
She shook her head, an ever-elegant maneuver to rid her face of stray hairs that fell across her eyes.
I appreciate your wanting to keep me company and your concern. Truly I do, and I love you for it. But please, it's impossible to be alone right now, and this is the closest I can get to it. Please allow me this.
Of course.
Twilight stood, fully understanding Rarity's need for privacy. She'd been silent, even stoic after coming back to the group with Sweetie Belle's body. Never a single tear shed. Even as the filly was lowered into her makeshift grave and covered over by a mound of earth, Rarity still kept her composure. If this was what she needed, Twilight would gladly give it to her. But it didn't make it feel any less wrong to not even embrace her hurting friend before leaving. As she methodically cleaned Cheerilee's wounds, Rarity's head tilted to the side and her eyes ran over her body, inspecting.
My dear Cheerilee,
she said softly.
Can you ever forgive me for what a terrible pony I was when this nightmare began? I said many things I didn't mean and many things I would take back if I were given the opportunity. And you were right when you compared Diamond Tiara and me. As hard as it is to admit, I definitely had my days.
The corners of her mouth twitched upward slightly.
Oh, who am I kidding? I still have my days.
Cheerilee gave a shuddering sigh that shook her whole frame and had Rarity placing a hoof on her friend's forehead.
Oh my goodness, you're burning up. Listen to me, Cheerilee. You must fight. You have to stay alive. The apple bloom. She has to accept the loss of one of her best friends today. I don't think the poor little thing could handle losing her beloved teacher as well. Though I admit, I'm glad that you did not have to see Sweetie Belle as I had.
Rarity paused and looked down, deep sorrow in her eyes.
Sweetie Belle loved you so. And now I know you loved her. I know you love all of your students, and it was terrible of me to argue that.
Her eyes filled and she shook her head.
I have been a terrible friend and a terrible, terrible sister.
That was all she could get out, because once the tears started coming, they simply wouldn't stop. Outside, there was not a single pony that could not hear her weeping. Still they all sat around the fire, staring motionless into the flames. Applejack reached up and pulled her hat off her head, tears in her own eyes. She looked up at her brother and gave him a loving nuzzle. Between his forelegs, Applebloom was huddled with Silver Spoon on one side of her and Snails on the other, crying quietly. Twilight no longer had an appetite, and pushed her greens aside. It had been hard losing Sweetie Belle, not just because she was some pony they all knew and cared about, but because it made them each think about who they cared for that was still out there, and who they might yet have to say goodbye to.
I have this memory of Sweetie Belle,
said Snails quietly.
where she fell asleep in class and drooled so much onto the floor that some pony slipped when he got up to go use the bathroom.
Everyone looked at him and he blinked, then shrank into himself as if realizing he'd just spoken out loud.
Sorry.
Applebloom sniffled beside Snails. I remember that day. Miss Cheerilee even had a hard time not laughing at that.
I never wanted to say anything,
added Silver Spoon reluctantly.
But her questions were the best. They always got Miss Cheerilee onto a whole different subject. And by the time she realized it, it was time for recess.
Yeah, Applebloom agreed. And the best part was that she didn't even know she was doing it. Applejack chuckled.
You know my favorite memory of her? That time when all of y'all went fishing and she got her line caught in the main, and y'all came running back screaming and hollering up a storm. You and Scoots were flat out panicked, and Sweetie Belle just laughed it off. Said she wanted a new main style anyhow.
I know Dinky liked her,
offered Bubblecup.
She really likes all three of you and looks up to you.
Appleblossom looked at the mail mare with raised brows. Really? Bubblecup smiled and nodded.
You're a few years older than she is, and she just wants acknowledgement from you. Most of the time she thinks ponies ignore her or tease her when she's not around because of me.
We never teased her, Applebloom promised. Snails blinked cluelessly, but Silver Spoon hung her head.
I might have. I'm sorry, dear Bubblecup. I really am. I think about all the mean things we used to say about Sweetie Belle. And Scootaloo. And you too, Applebloom. I'm really sorry.
Applebloom looked at Applejack, and the two shared a small smile. With compassion, Applebloom draped her hoof across Silver Spoon's withers. I forgive you, Silver Spoon. After all, we gotta stick together now. The tent flaps suddenly opened, and Rarity came out. Her eyes were red and puffy, but she hardly seemed to care when she looked directly at Big Macintosh.
Cheerilee is awake. She's asking for you.
Big Mac blinked, confused.
Me?
The little ones resting in his pseudo-embrace moved so he could get up, and everyone watched him lumber into the tent. Rarity sniffled daintily and sat between Twilight and Applejack, not objecting this time when her friends tried to comfort her with touches.
What were we talking about?
She asked. Twilight smiled at her.
We were sharing our favorite memories of Sweetie Belle.
Ah, well, if that's the case, I believe I have a few I'd like to contribute.
Inside the tent, Cheerilee lay on her side. Her breathing was ragged and sluggish, and her wounds appeared to be refusing to stop bleeding. Big Mac had to duck so as not to ruin the tent by knocking it down with his head, and seeing Cheerilee just laying there was sobering. She looked up at him through slitted eyes and managed a small smile.
You know what I always valued about you, Big Mac?
Her voice was raspy, her words coming out in small gasps.
You have very telling eyes. Honest. Just like your sister.
Big Mac smiled politely and folded his legs under him so he could be closer and not have to worry about being too tall for the delicate structure.
You shouldn't be talking so much, Cheerilee. You gotta save your strength.
Not much to save.
She wheezed.
I needed to thank you.
For what?
Saving us. Being my friend.
The red stallion shook his head, a somewhat shy smile turning up the edges of his mouth.
No pony wanted to be friends with the Topi Farm colt. You were there. We've been friends for a long time now, and I don't think I ever quite said any sort of thanks to you.
Her eyes closed and she took another hard breath. Her brows came together and she bit down on her bottom lip in obvious pain. It made Big Macintosh angry and uncomfortable.
What can I do? How can I help?
She didn't say anything for several seconds as she waited for the pain to subside. Once it had, her breathing leveled out and she opened her eyes again.
You can take care of them. If history teaches us anything, it's that this is all going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
We're gonna find you some help real soon.
No, Big Mac.
It took a lot of effort on her part, but Cheerilee managed to slide a hoof forward to rest on one of Big Mac's.
There's no help for me now. Everything hurts and burns, and I can feel myself dying.
Then why did you ask me in here?
His voice was low and angry, already guessing the answer. Her eyes could not hide her pain or her sorrow.
You know why.
No, I won't do it.
You would do it for any other suffering animal.
You're not an animal, Cheerilee. You're a pony. You're my friend.
As his voice rose, voices outside quieted, and Big Mac checked himself, reminding to be quiet.
I ain't gonna do it.
Please, Big Mac. I wouldn't ask if I thought...
We're so close to Manehattan. There could be help there.
She didn't protest this time. Just lay where she was looking at him, letting her eyes do the pleading for her. It made Big Mac stick his jaw out stubbornly.
Damn you for asking me to do this, Cheerilee. Damn you.
Make sure you bury me deep. Don't let them get to me.
I won't.
He raised himself up on his hooves and sniffled quietly.
You are going to make some mare incredibly happy someday.
He dipped his head and brushed a kiss over her sweaty brow, placing one knee by her head and his other foreleg behind her.
Tell me something. What's your favorite memory about Ponyville?
She smiled with nostalgia, her eyes sliding closed.
Warm summer days, with cool breezes that spread scents from the bakery of pies and cakes, and...
It was over quickly. She was so weak that there was no natural resistance. All he had to do was pin her head between his knee and his hoof and give a sharp jerk. Then her ragged breathing was done, and she lay still, the peaceful smile of memory still on her lips. Big Macintosh bent over her and cried with his muzzle in her mane, holding her in his strong embrace. She would always be his first friend, and therefore his best friend. It hurt unbelievably to be the one to take her life, though he understood why she'd wanted it that way. Looking down at her, he vowed that hers would be the last body he would see buried.
Some pony's coming.
Pokey's voice rang out in the distance, and Big Macintosh looked up. The timing could not have been worse. He gently let go of Cheerilee and moved outside to see the unicorn stallion galloping their way in the dying light.
How many?
Big Macintosh asked firmly.
2.
Pokey panted, rejoining the group.
A Pegasus and another pony. I couldn't tell what kind from so far away, but they're headed in this direction.
Cheerilee is gone.
All attention went to Big Mac, and he nodded, frowning deeply.
We have to protect her body.
He looked at his baby sister and the other 2 young ones, seeing Apple Bloom's bottom lip quiver.
Time to be strong, Apple Bloom.
He walked over to her and nuzzled against her cheek.
I know y'all are sad. I'm sad too. But we don't have the luxury of time right now.
Into the tent, young'uns,
ordered Applejack.
Raindrop, since you're hurt, you going with him.
The Earth Pony looked at Pokey.
You sure there were only 2 of them?
Positive.
Applejack nodded, satisfied, and returned her attention to the injured Pegasus.
Keep them in there. We'll handle this.
Having been together and out in the open for 3 days now, the entire group moved as a well-oiled machine. Bubblecup and Mary May took to the sky. Rarity, Twilight, and Pokey faced the direction their attackers were coming from, with heads down, ready to strike. Once sure the rest of them were in the tent, Applejack and Big Macintosh moved ahead of the unicorns, ready with offensive moves. They were the first wave of the battle, being the strongest among them. The unicorns came in as a second wave to finish off the wandering spirits. So far, they'd survived 2 significant attacks that way.
1 o'clock!
Warned Mary May. Everyone looked off to the right just slightly, and sure enough, there was the silhouette of a Pegasus in the sky. The other pony was nowhere to be seen yet.
Bubblecup, take left. I'll take right. Ready? Now!
The 2 Pegasi split, and with a feral cry to make any war general envious, Mary May flew a quick and tight right loop and ran headfirst into the Pegasus pony. He cried out, knocked into Bubblecup, who was ready and waiting to give him a good swift buck. Disoriented and slightly beat up, the unfamiliar Pegasus fell to the ground and landed with a thud. The unicorns thundered past the Apple siblings to finish the deed. Pokey, with longer legs and a greater stride, arrived first and lunged forward with his sharp horn, only to bounce back from an invisible shield. They all looked up to see the faint blue glow around the horn of a tall unicorn silhouette.
It's using magic?
Pokey asked incredulously.
They talk now?
Asked the beaten Pegasus derisively.
Back off!
Cried the shadowed unicorn. She reared up and galloped into view with her head down and horn forward, skidding to a halt just behind her companion. A collective gasp went out, but none louder than Mary May when she landed. She looked at the Pegasus she'd rammed into with wide eyes.
Spectrum!
Forgetting about the shield around him, she launched herself at her friend, only to bounce off the invisible wall and fall back on her rear end.
Mary May?
Spectrum got to his hooves with a slight wince and looked around.
Allie, it's okay. We know these guys.
And the others don't talk or use magic,
Twilight offered wisely. The glow around Allie's horn died, and she shook her head.
I'm sorry. You just can't be too careful out here.
Ain't that the truth?
Said Applejack.
Snails will be real happy to see you.
You have snails?
Come on out, y'all. We got friendly company.
As the adults returned to the campfire, those within the tent came out in great hurry, clearly eager to be away from the dead body within.
Snails?
Mom?
The gangly colt rushed forward to be embraced by Allie.
I never thought I'd see you again.
She squeezed him tight.
I never thought I'd see you again either.
Now as faces came more into focus within the light of the fire, Allie looked around.
There are so many of you. How in Equestria have you all survived?
It hasn't been easy,
said Twilight honestly.
We were all pretty scattered and found each other along the way.
Her eyes went to the tent and then to Rarity.
And we've lost some as well.
Looking at Allie, Twilight's expression was curious.
How have you and Spectrum been surviving on your own?
We're not on our own.
Spectrum corrected quickly.
But we left the rest of our group in the city. I saw your fire smoke, and Allie suggested we come out and investigate. The others don't like fire, so we figured it had to be ponies still alive. But you haven't moved since this morning.
His brows came together in confusion.
Why haven't you moved?
Cheerilee was injured.
Big Macintosh said heavily.
Was?
Allie asked.
She passed. Just tonight.
I'm so sorry.
The unicorn said softly.
We lost a lot of friends on the way to Manhattan. I didn't know Cheerilee well, but I can still empathize.
You said there are others with you in the city,
Rarity asked.
Does that mean Manhattan is safe? Who else is with you?
Not entirely safe,
answered Allie.
There are a hoofful of different groups of ponies all throughout the city, and the others still walk around now and then. But it's crazy. Ponies are fighting each other for supplies, water, food. It's pretty territorial. There are marauders that go out mostly at night to try and raid camps and steal what they can. But Manhattan was hit pretty badly. It looks like a ghost town, and every pony that's there now is in a fight for survival. They're all looking out for their groups and themselves, and could care less about who they're hurting in order for them to stay alive.
You mentioned a lack of food,
said Rarity curiously.
Granted, the idea did not sit well with me at first, grazing like some common wild horse. But surely there is some grass in the city.
But Spectrum shook his head.
It's too developed. There are a few parks where we could get food, but they're claimed. We haven't had to fight anyone too badly yet. But now,
He trailed off and looked at Allie.
with the 5 of us, Pinky said we have enough food for 3 days. Now?
Pinkie Pie?
Asked Twilight quickly.
Yes.
Allie smiled at her.
Spike is with us as well.
She looked to Bubblecup.
And Dinky. They're all just fine.
Oh, thank you, Celestia.
Bubblecup whispered, tears in her eyes.
Thank you for taking care of her.
Thank you for taking care of my son. All of you. But we should really be heading back. The darker it gets, the more dangerous it is for us to be out here.
We need to bury Cherry first.
Everyone looked at Big Macintosh.
I made her a promise.
Then we should do it quickly.
Allie suggested. With 4 unicorns on the job, a deep and proper grave was hollowed out for Cheerilee. She was placed in gently with magic, and almost looked to be sleeping. There was no time for formality or words of goodbye. The moon was already high, and the large group needed to get to the city as quickly as they could. Once certain his friend was safe in the ground, Big Macintosh and Applejack took down their carefully constructed tent and stashed it away. With a great stomp, he put the fire out, then looked toward the looming city in the distance.
Let's go.